welcome to episode number 53 of Gar Borras' Time Machine. And Gar, just like we started with our last episode, this is our 2023 season of holiday theme shows. And last time we did Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein to kick off the Halloween season. And we're kind of in that mode still for episode 53. We're going to be talking all about the classic 1989 film, The Burbs, starring Tom Hanks, Carrie Fisher, and Cory Feldman. Now, before we get into today's episode, Gar, I wanted to ask, you, me, and a lot of people I talk to about this film, many people think of this as a Halloween film. And interesting enough, when it was originally released, it came out, I found out like February of 1989, right around Valentine's. And you kind of wonder, why did they release it then? But it's funny how all these years, 34 years later, people think of this as a Halloween film. So let's talk a little bit about that. And, I know for the longest time you've been wanting to do an episode on The Burbs, which is why we decided to do this. But what was your immediate reaction to this film back in 1989 when you saw it for the very first time?
That I loved it. It had all of the elements that I always really enjoy when I watch a movie. All of the characters were, endearing.
Sure.
I loved all of the different characters, and I love movies. All movies have like a star and a co-star.
Sure.
But the movie is, I'm not just stuck in this area, but there's an area of movies that I really enjoy, which is the ensemble cast, where all of the characters, draw you into the movie. It's not just the story about the star and the co-star, and then the other actors around are kind of incidental, but you see what I'm saying? This is one of those movies that's an ensemble cast, and everything clicked. Because back in the 80s, you didn't have a whole lot of movies that were improvised. Where dialogue and everything is improvised. Usually what you have I need to be clear, because I go back many years, and there was a time before digital.
Oh, sure.
And there was a time before videotapes, before videotapes became a thing in households in America.
Oh, sure.
And previous to that, movies, were shown in theaters, and either they were a success in the theaters or they were not. You see what I mean?
Sure.
But then when videotapes came out, and that became a popular form of entertainment in the home, then movies that might not have done as well in the theaters have a second chance at reaching an audience, which was the videotape. And all of this stuff was kind of discovered by accident by the studios, because there were movies that the movie studios previous to all of this would just throw the movie in the trash bin and forget about it. But now the fact that movies get re-released through videos into the homes, that's how a lot of movies gained cult followings, and where a lot of movies maybe weren't successful in the theaters, but actually broke even or made their profit through the actual video sales.
Oh, sure. Gar, you bring up a great point. Back in 1989, let's think about 1989 was kind of the end, the end of the 80s, a dawn of a new generation. 1990 was right around the corner, and at that time, you make a couple of great points. It was like 1989 was like the height of music CDs, and it was. And do you remember at that time? You're absolutely right. The videotape they had. You could buy usually like two versions. They had beta tape machines, which were those huge ones like the TV shows, but most people had a VHS video player where you could play these movies, at home, and you could also record stuff that you wanted to watch on TV. But what I remember more than that, Gar, and you remember those videotapes, you'd play them over and over, and eventually the tape would get eaten. That's one thing. You also remember the movies, even before they had videotape, they had those big, huge, almost looked like a record, movies on Laserdisc.
Well, then also another thing about having those videotapes, if you didn't break those tabs, somebody could take a movie that you had that you wanted to keep and then video over it. And now that was a thing back in those days, and there was a lot of people that learned that the hard way, that if they were saving the movie, if they didn't break those tabs, somebody else could take the videotape and put it in the player and record a football game over it or something like that. And that was classic. Then. But see, what I'm getting at is Burbs was one of those movies that was not received well by the critics.
Sure.
And it really was not considered a box office success. But where it really gained its steam was being one of those movies that discovered an afterlife on the video market. Because every time somebody went into a Blockbuster Video and rented that video, the studios would get their piece.
In fact,
you know what I mean? And so that's the way the whole thing was going, and this is one of those movies. And then another thing about the movie that really made it different was back in the 80s, there really wasn't a lot of improvisation. Improvisation nowadays has become a method, in how some people want to put together their movies. And classic examples of movies that have a lot of improvisation is Ricky Bobby, Ballad of Ricky Bobby. That movie with Will Ferrell. That movie is just loaded with all kinds of improvisation, and improvisation really works. Because Burbs is one of the firsts of that. I'm not going to say it's the first because I really don't know. But the Burbs, the reason why the Burbs used improvisation was not because it had become a method in how people were making their movies. No, it was improvised because it was made during the writer's strike. We've had many of these Time Machine episodes where we talk about the writer's strikes. Well, this movie was made during the writer's strikes, so when they were filming, they had no ability to do rewrites for scenes. And at that time, that's exactly what you would do, is they would rewrite the scene. They would have the writers on the set, and then they would do corrections and make things, work for the movie's dialogue and stuff like that. Well, they didn't have that luxury when they were making the Burbs. So to fill in that gap of not having rewrites, the director actually instructed the actors to do ad-libs. And those ad-libs are what make the movie so special.
Sure, and Gar,
I didn't know it until I started doing the research because I just loved the movie. But I did the research preparing for our show here, and I found out that they had to do the improvisation forced out of necessity.
Yeah, and Gar, we discussed that in another one of our episodes. about the movie, which would be released like 2 years, well, in 1984. And I'm talking, of course, about the Spinal Tap film, where a lot of those actors, Michael McKean and Harry Guest, a lot of the film ended up being ad-libbed, and that's not something that was originally planned, but they just that's kind of something the actors did. And what was interesting, I remember talking about this as Spinal Tap, is that the Writers Guild had a big problem. They did not want to credit those guys as writers on the film because they weren't part of the American Writers Guild, and there was a big controversy about that. But again, even though it was ad-libbed, another classic cult film.
Yes, and so nowadays it's a thing. You know what I mean? It's been done many times. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's part of mainstream now. But back in 1989, it was not part of mainstream. It was unusual to do that, and they were actually forced into doing it, and discovered after the movie was finished and released that was what really made the movie so special. And the the entire cast was absolutely fantastic. Everything. The element of Cory Feldman as the metalhead with his, pot smoking party friends, ordering pizza, and their idea of having fun was hanging out at his house and watching the crazy neighbors doing their crazy neighborhood things. You know what I mean? Yeah. Obviously, these neighbors historically in the storyline were notorious for doing crazy things, and that's why Cory Feldman used to, call his friends up, hey man, got something going on, you're not going to want to miss this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Kind of thing. And that's an element in a film that's very different from any other film, because you know what I mean?
Sure.
It was a rarity at that time. It wasn't done. It wasn't, nowadays it's like overdone. You know what I mean? But all of that was like, done for the first time, and it just worked. The crazy neighbor that's paranoid, with the guns and the paramilitary one, Bruce Dern playing that character.
Sure.
And then his wife, oh my God.
What
so gorgeous.
And you're thinking right away, how did a weirdo like that get a hot chick like that to marry him?
But it worked.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
The Odd Couple.
You accept her as Mrs. Rumsfeld.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And she is so gorgeous.
Oh, sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I know what you mean.
The movie,
Hey, Gar.
Back in those days, it's just going, wow, she's hot.
Gar, I gotta tell you, last night watching the film.
The cast was so strong too.
Yeah.
It wasn't just Tom Hanks. You know what I mean? Carrie Fisher's character.
Yeah.
The element. Here's another thing about the movie that I really just found so special was the way that they portrayed couples in the movie was where the male in the couple had to endure doing things that he didn't like to do.
Yeah.
And he didn't want to do, but was forced to do by his wife to make her happy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That was an element that was in the movie. What the movie does is it really is it's putting social quirks under the microscope.
Yeah. Let me tell you.
You know what I mean? Because all of these things that they're addressing are social things.
Oh, sure, Gar.
Say, for example, the neighbors. We're paranoid of neighbors because they look so different.
Yeah.
That's a social thing.
Gar.
See what I'm saying?
Oh, sure.
We're paranoid. You know what I mean? Because they're so different, they must be up to something bad. You know what I mean?
Sure.
The paranoia. All of these elements in the movie are social elements. So it's really a social satire.
Yeah, Gar, and one thing I noticed from watching the film last night is as the film is starting, They're not none of the people in these in any of the parts. None of them are exactly the Munsters or the Addams family. But one thing that this film has kind of in common with those characters is that kind of the oddball characters throughout the film. They all kind of each one of these different groups of people, each of the different neighbors. You can tell they think they're the so-called normal ones, and everybody else in the neighborhood are the weird ones.
And I really like that scene at the end where Tom Hanks was sitting there going, because they spent the whole movie being paranoid about these other people, but Tom Hanks realized in real life, take it out of the movie, if people that do that kind of stuff are the monsters. And that's what he realized at the end of the movie. We're the monsters. We're the ones that are actually doing the things that we're paranoid about that we don't even want, but we're the ones doing it. And it was really true. They really were, doing that. But for the storyline being a Halloween theme thing, of course you have to have it come out at the end that they actually do turn out to be evil, because that's how you get your grand finale.
See, that's what I loved about the film, because in most of the time in a film like that, you're thinking all the way through the film, these people are spying on their neighbors. They're really paranoid. And kind of by the end of the film, you kind of realize, typically you would think that, those guys, they were the weird ones. They were spying on the neighbors all the time. It was paranoid. But what I loved about this film, they didn't go that direction. They went the other direction, as you said, and it's like, well, you know what? The paranoia was kind of, he kind of had a reason for being paranoid. It seemed almost justified,
Yeah, but in real life, the odds of that paranoia being true is very, very low.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
In real life.
That's what I'm saying.
So nobody bets on low odds. And that is the truth, about it, but it's really, when I started doing the research and everything, I really noticed how, in coming up with the storyline and everything, it was really a look at social interactions and how those social interactions can go haywire. And of course, when things go haywire, that makes for great comedy.
Now let's talk about the cast. I mean, I feel with you the cast was very strong, each and every one of them. And what's interesting is Tom Hanks is definitely one of the leading stars. Now, let's talk a little bit about Tom Hanks, because I think this was, I'm not sure if it's the very first movie ever. I think Splash was the very first movie ever did. But my point is, when we first come across Tom Hanks in our life, most of us remember him from a TV show, Bosom Buddies. And that's just that lighthearted kind of comedy where him and his best friend, they were looking all over for an apartment. I think it was in San Francisco, I remember. And they couldn't find any apartment they could afford. But they were able to find this one. But only one thing, it was a hotel for women. So you had to dress up like women. And they got in all these funny scenarios. But that's where most of us saw Tom Hanks for the first time. And to see the kind of career from that he has been able to go on and have is just amazing.
Well, you don't have a career, it doesn't turn out that way unless you really do have
that talent.
And obviously Tom Hanks has an incredible wealth of talent.
Oh, sure.
His career, I mean, just virtually every character he does, is believable.
Yeah.
And he has so many of these different characters that he's done that are all different from each other. He's not one of those one-trick pony actors where, he's got a shtick and he does it in every appearance. Every character is different, but they're all extremely well done. They're all really believable. You know what I mean? So it's always easy to buy into the storyline of the movie that he's in. He has that kind of quality to his acting.
In fact,
which is only the cream that rises to the top has that.
Has that.
You see what I'm saying?
Oh, sure.
There are a million actors out there that don't have that quality. So the quality that he has is, something that's very rare to find.
In fact, he's one of, I think, a few actors that won 2 Oscar awards, like, back to back. I can't remember what the other film was. I know the first one was for Forrest Gump. That's another one of his classic films I urge people to go see. I mean, if you're at all a history buff, it's just funny. The character's just so loving. But that's for another episode. But what I was able to find out about Tom Hanks getting the role, it says Tom Hanks was chosen to play the role of Ray Peterson because he was a very capable actor who had the ability to do both comedy and drama, depending on what the scene called for. Tom Hanks was very likable, an actor who was very much on the rise, and who was at the top of his game in 1989.
He sure was, and he was in I think he was about 33 years old when he made the Burbs.
Yeah, probably.
So he was old enough to be a parent.
Yeah.
Even though he really didn't see himself at that time as being a parent.
Yeah.
He saw himself as too young to be a parent. Mm-hmm. But, and he was against being a parent in the movie. He wanted to be a more modern single parent.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Where, it's just him and the wife and no kids. Yeah. But honestly, he didn't realize it, but the rest of America realized that he had reached a point where he was mature enough to play a father.
And the kid in the movie was kind of weird. The one that played his son, but kind of weird too. But again, I think that was the whole point. And let's talk about like the fact that Carrie Fisher was in this film. When most of us think of Carrie Fisher, we think, of course, of Princess Leia. That was kind of a main role. I know she did other films, but let's be honest. What she's remembered mostly for is Star Wars. But I think this was a great film because it showcased her talent as an actress, that she could do more than Princess Leia. You know what I mean?
Yeah, she was a housewife, and she played that housewife, very, very, good. But it just seemed, the way they portrayed her in the movie wasn't very nice. Yeah. She was always writing him about things that, to me, were like, wait a minute. It's actually not cool for her to be writing her about those issues. Yeah. He's on vacation.
Yeah.
He's taken a week off from work, and she is giving him like all kinds of hassle about the fact that he's not doing something that's a vacation thing during his vacation. Say, like going to the cabin or doing something like that, and all he wanted to do was just laze around the house and just take a week off and just be lazy. That's all he wanted to do, and she just would not let him do that.
But they were the perfect couple, and what I loved about him was the fact that he didn't just kind of roll over and do what he was. I love the fact that he kind of told her off. I mean, and see, that's the other thing I had trouble kind of following at first was, okay, they're supposed to be on vacation, and then several times throughout the movie she's, you know what, you just finish all this craziness, you continue spying on our neighbors if that's what you and your buddies want to do. I'm going to take our son and we're going to go spend our vacation elsewhere. And of course, never did it, but all through the movie, like you said, there's a thread of that.
Well, let's talk about his best friend.
Yeah.
Because not every guy, but most guys growing up had that best friend that everybody else views as that bad influence.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I just the guy that played his best friend in the movie, just played that character so well, and now I kind of realize why he played the character so well was because it was the ad lib element, because he was using his stand-up comedy ability to come up with these ad libs that they kept in the movie, and a lot of the stuff that he was saying in the movie were ad libs. Satan is my pal,
yeah.
and all that kind of stuff. And I just really loved, how he portrayed that character, that bad influence best friend.
Yeah. I got a funny story to share with you, Gar, about something similar that I went through. I got this. I guess you could say what I would refer to as my best friend. This guy I've known for many years, and people tell me that I'm kind of between me and my friend, I'm kind of the brains of the group. And what's funny is I remember taking him to another friend's one time, and he's meeting this person for the first time. And again, my friend, I think it's a little bit of he was raised in a foster home. He didn't know his parents till later in life, and this and that. He had issues he went through. And so, anyways, I take him to my other friend's house. He's meeting her for the first time, and before he even says hello to my friend, he goes right to her. Keep in mind, it's somebody he's meeting for the first. Goes right to the refrigerator, see what they have to eat, and the other friend is like, hello. Why don't you say hello first? And then on top of it, he puts his tennis shoes on top of a person's table. I'm like, no, we don't do that here.
Oh man, first impression. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But everybody's got that friend that other people look at as that bad influence.
Yeah.
And so I can't pronounce his name.
Yeah.
Well, but I really honestly feel deeply that I'm disappointed that his career didn't go farther.
I'm with you.
Because he was so good in the Burbs.
Sure.
I think if he was part of another ad lib type of project, I think he would do well in that kind of environment. Say somebody putting together a Ballad of Ricky Bobby type of movie where there's just a ton of ad libs. Those are the type of movies that he would have really thrived in. So I have a feeling that probably has a lot to do with why his career is, because most of the other stuff that he did was scripted, where Burbs really allowed him to really spread his comedic wings and just really, I cannot say enough about the job that he did as that best friend character.
I totally agree. I mean, he was the perfect guy to play the role of Tom Hanks's crazy sidekick friend, But you're so right. And what I will say about the rest of the cast, okay, well, this like I mentioned at the top of this episode, the three kind of leading stars of this: Tom Hanks, Carrie Fisher, and Cory Feldman. Now, Cory Feldman's another guy, had an interesting career. I would say he's like a B or C actor. Not to say that he hasn't had a career, but I don't think it marvels anywhere near like Tom Hanks. And the funny thing I'm going to bring up here, I think he was great in this role. In fact, when I think of Cory Feldman, probably this is the only film that comes to mind. And I know he's done a lot of other films, but you know what I mean? This, I think, is a role that he will be remembered for. And sadly, some of the other films he's done, they don't really, stick in our minds for whatever reason.
Well, I think that the best character that Cory Feldman played was his character in Stand By Me.
Oh, there, yeah, okay,
To me, that I think that is just one of those stories,
pivotal roles,
by, Stephen King, that wasn't a horror story.
Yeah.
Stephen King was a great writer, and he also happened to be a very successful horror writer.
Sure.
But there are a lot of books and stories that he wrote that were not horror, and they were great stories. I mean, just extremely high level of writing abilities.
Wow. You're so right, Gar. And other thing, I was reading. Let's talk a little more about The Burbs. The Burbs is a 1989 comedy film starring Tom Hanks, Carrie Fisher, Cory Feldman, as you said. The film was directed by Joe Dante, produced by Ron Howard. This is one of the first things Ron Howard produced after he left, Happy Days. The film was released, as I said, on February 17th, 1989. And what I want to talk about now here is a couple things. Like I said at the top of today's show, this came out in February of 1989. And all these years later, it is very much thought of as a Halloween type of movie. And that's interesting because it really has nothing to do with Halloween. They don't even mention Halloween at all. But it is, many of us watch it every time, Halloween time of the year. I think because, I think this may have been the first film maybe since Young Frankenstein, which was, that came out around 1974, I believe. And this has maybe been the first film where they kind of combined comedy and horror. But the interesting thing is, unlike Young Frankenstein, 1989, movies are being made in color. This was a color film where they were able to successfully combine the horror with the comedy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that the set that they used, having the Klopex house being the original Munsters house.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that neighborhood that they use in the movie is actually on the back lots
of Universal
Studios. So it's actually a fake neighborhood.
Yeah.
That's been used in all kinds of stuff. I think Buffy the Vampire Slayer, has used that set, to film their shows, and there's just a ton of others. So that actual neighborhood that they used to film The Burbs, it has a lot of other highly successful TV shows that use the same neighborhood.
Yeah.
It's just here's a piece of information that I came across in doing this that I really didn't know, but it's really, really interesting. Okay, the little dog that I forgot his name, but that neighbor would let him go poop.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
That dog was in another. Not only was it the dog in this movie, but that dog was also in another movie.
Wow.
And you'll never guess what that movie is.
I have no idea. Wow. Yeah.
It's the dog in Silence of the Lambs.
Wow. What a...
It puts the lotion in the basket.
Ah, wow.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That scene, that is the same dog.
Yeah. Oh, wow. And as far as you're right, Gar. I also read that the filming of The Burbs took place entirely on the Universal Studios lot, and it took over 10 weeks to film it. And again, another interesting thing I came across. It says that now talking a little bit about the plot and what the film was based on. It said screenwriter Dana Olson based the script on his own upbringing because he said the town where he grew up had its share of psychos in the mid-1930s. The town where he grew up had a legendary hatchet murder. Olson said his approach to The Burbs, now this is what I love, his approach to The Burbs, Gar, was Ozzie and Harriet meets Charles Manson.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's a great way to describe it. You know what I mean?
I mean, just two parallels.
All I can say is I put movie on a couple of days ago, just to, because I just love the movie so much, and I'm one of those legions of people that consider it a classic for Halloween. But when I watched it, the movie did not disappoint. I mean, it did not disappoint in the slightest bit, even though I've seen it so many times.
Yeah, I can tell you.
I put it on, I watched it, and I'm just thinking to myself, my God, I have seen this so many times, but I'm still enjoying it, now, as much as I've enjoyed it all these other times watching it. It's really, for people like me, it's really stood the test of time, and it's part of that rotation for Halloween, just like Young Frankenstein is part of that rotation, and it just has so many cool elements. What I prefer, and I have always preferred, is creepy.
And
when you're mixing creepy with comedy, oh my God, it's such a good mix.
In fact, Gar, I don't know if you've seen the ad I put up on our Facebook page announcing that we were going to do this episode today. That I was asking you because, a lot of times when we look back on these classic horror films, one thing that you always bring up is, I think last time when we were talking about Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, you're telling me this film, like so many of these classic horror films we discussed, you're telling me this film, I gotta say, I just love the creepy. That's a thing with you. So my question to you that I was asking on our Facebook page today, where on your creepy meter does this register, Gar?
Well, okay. Now, unfortunately, now I've discovered that creepy, there can be actually creepy on steroids, which can actually really creep you out and scare the crap out of you. I up until and I just discovered this recently with the new show that I've been watching. This movie goes in the category of safe creepy.
Safe creepy, okay. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Where it has the elements of creepy, but it's not super scary. I wouldn't have any qualms about having a kid watch with me. Because it's a great way to explain, that, none of this stuff is real, and it's being presented in a way that's non-threatening because it's comedy. You know what I mean? So that's the category I would put it in. It's safe creepy.
Safe creepy. I love that.
Nowadays, I've discovered that creepy can, be there's stuff out there now that's creepy on steroids.
There's different levels of creepy.
Stuff is a little bit too far for me, because I don't really like watching things that when it's all done and I've turned it off and everything, where I have a bad feeling after I've watched it. Whenever I watch a movie and I have that kind of a feeling, I regret watching it.
In fact, Gar, we're gonna have to in a future episode talk about like creating your creepy meter, because I love that safe creepy. It makes sense. I mean, let's talk about the ending of the film, which I just love, because number one, the ending of the film, like you said, I love the fact that all the way through the film, the fact he's spying on his neighbors. Kind of get the feeling that Tom Hanks' character and all his friends, that they're kind of like paranoid. That's kind of the feeling through most of the movie. But by the end of the movie, it's almost like, okay, the actual real bad, they weren't so crazy after all. They ended up being right about the guys living in the house. I mean, and then at the very ending, the real bad guys get their coming, and they get what they deserve. They get arrested, and then I love in where they're like, okay, we got okay, we know this guy probably killed people, but we don't have proof. And then the thing with all the skeletons at the very last scene, we got our proof.
they had to have a grand finale, and for a movie that's based in horror, it only makes sense that it's going to take a turn like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, turns out they actually were.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Kind of a thing.
Yeah.
It's the movie is formulaic.
Yeah.
So to speak.
But it works. It works.
There are certain movies that are formula-based that if they're still done really well, I still enjoy watching them.
Sure.
I still enjoy them.
Sure. Yeah.
I won't turn away a movie just because the movie is following a formula, that might have a successful trend, to it, or that kind of a thing, but for me, the Burbs,
it's classic.
It's almost like it's an accidental classic.
Yeah, in fact,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't think that when they made the movie that they ever thought that it was going to be a classic.
No.
I don't think that I don't think that anybody had any idea of that. 40 years later, people would still be talking about the movie and still celebrating the movie, and that the movie would become part of people's traditions for every Halloween in their lives. None of that stuff was, anything that crossed their minds. But now you look at it, and you look at even just the poster that they used for the movie.
Yeah.
Just that picture and that poster has become
iconic. Yeah. As iconic as the classic 1933 King Kong poster. And Gar, it is. While it's not his most celebrated film, I'm talking about Tom Hanks. Now, all these years later, anytime anybody talks about Tom Hanks, his career, this is one of those films in his catalog of films that gets brought up just as much as, say, Forrest Gump or Captain Phillips or something like that.
And rightly so, because we're doing a show about it. What does that say about the Burbs?
It tells you that.
The Burbs. I think it's one of those movies that. And I'm guilty of this. I will pass on a movie just because of the movie's name.
Yeah.
And I have done that so many times with movies that later I discovered by accident that, oh my gosh, these are amazing movies. But they're amazing movies with names that make it easy for an audience to pass on.
Gar, let's what I think would be fun to do a future episode on. This kind of just popped in my head as we're talking. How many times, and I'm guilty of this too, in your life, have you gone to see a movie knowing very little about the movie, maybe who's in it, you recognize the names, or more than anything, you went to see the movie based on the movie poster you saw, the ad or the TV ad about the movie. These days, maybe people see trailers on YouTube, but how often have you gone to see a movie knowing very little bit, just based because maybe who's in it, or it's got a cool looking movie poster? Some that come to mind, like Star Wars, Back to the Future, Indiana Jones. These are just some examples.
That's how I discover movies that I passed on.
Yeah.
For many years or whatever, and then I wind up discovering that they are actually,
pretty good.
Yeah. You know what I mean? That I had no idea, that I just kept passing on them and kept passing on them. And Burbs is one of those movies with one of those kind of names, where I think there are still people that might even be my age that never gave the movie a chance, just because of the name, and they still to this day don't know what they're missing. And it really truly is one of, like Office Space. That's a movie that I Until I finally discovered that it is not a good movie, a great movie.
Yeah, see?
You know, and the list goes on and on and on of all these movies that have horrible names that I discovered. You know, to me, the biggest enjoyment that I think I have nowadays is watching something new and giving it a chance. And watching it and having very low expectations.
Yeah.
And then when the movie's over, then I'm going, oh my gosh. You know, that movie is so much better than I was giving it credit for. That gives me a ton of enjoyment. Finding those diamonds in the rough. Watching movies that I have low expectations and they turn out to be really nice surprises. I really, really do enjoy doing that.
Oh, sure.
Even to this day.
And you know, Gar, another thing that I should probably mention before we wrap up today's episode is the fact that we talk a lot about Tom Hanks during today's episode, but it's worth mentioning that Carrie Fisher, besides many people remembering her as Princess Leia, let's be honest, she was kind of Hollywood royalty in that she was the daughter of two legendary actors.
Her parents were legends.
Debbie Reynolds and Eddie Fisher.
Nowadays, people still know about Debbie Reynolds.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think it's George Fisher. That was her father. He was a very, very famous musician at that time.
Okay. And you know, probably the one film I remember Debbie Reynolds from, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but if not, I suggest you, when you get a chance, check it out. It's called, it was with Debbie Reynolds and Albert Brooks. It was called simply Mother, where she just was kind of drove her son crazy, but they really loved each other and they had this kind of love-hate thing, but it was just funny all the way.
Well, you know, her mother, you know, had a huge, outstanding career, you know, during her time. Debbie Reynolds was a household name, you know, during I would imagine during the 50s.
60s and...
You know, 50s and 60s, yeah. She was a household name. Everybody knew who she was. She was extremely famous.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, her daughter following in her footsteps, and you really have to, you know, I mean, maybe Carrie Fisher's career was not as huge as her mother's.
Yeah, but
I mean, she still has, you know, movies that were highly successful that any actor or actress would be proud to show that, you know, their resume, and she really does have a very powerful resume.
Yeah, and I know throughout her life, Carrie Fisher struggled with addiction, both alcohol and drugs, and I bring that up only because if anybody remembers when Carrie Fisher died a few years back, I forget what she died of, but in any event, her mother and her, even though they had their issues, they were still very close, so much that sadly Carrie died before her mother, and her mother took it so hard that one day later she also died.
Well, you know, and you know, that's one of those things you can just look at and you know, it makes sense. You know what I mean? Mother, daughter.
How do you
know what I mean?
Survive that?
I'm sure they had their issues and stuff like that, like a lot of mothers and daughters. Yeah. But
they love each other.
Like a lot of other mothers and daughters that had issues, they still loved each other.
Of course. Yeah. And that's my point is the fact that you the way Debbie Reynolds died. I mean, she was pretty up there in age, but I don't know that, you know, Debbie Reynolds would have died then, you know, if her daughter hadn't died, and that kind of shows you how heartbroken the woman must have been at the loss of her daughter, you know.
Absolutely, and there was, you know, I'm sure there's a lot to that story that we know nothing about.
Yeah. Now here's another thing that I got to bring up before we wrap up today's episode. May the great late film critic Roger Ebert rest in peace. And we did a great episode on Siskel and Ebert, you know. But I bring Roger Ebert here up because it said Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times gave the Burbs 2 out of 4 stars, Gar, because get this, he felt the Burbs tries to position itself somewhere between Beetlejuice and The Twilight Zone and falls just a little short.
And everybody's got
Their
the
opinion.
right to their own opinion.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, that's the way he saw it.
Yeah.
I saw it very differently, and I'm sure a lot of other people saw it a lot of differently. And then it just goes back to another theme that just seems to pop up in the time machine is that, when all's said and done, most critics really do not have all the answers. They really don't know. There are so many movies that were thumbs down, by critics, about the movies that turned out to be huge successes. And not just huge successes, but really embraced by, millions and millions and millions of people. Literally embraced. So critics, they can give some insight and might be able to give, an opinion, what their opinion is about the movie. But it really comes down to that's just one person's opinion.
Sure.
Really it is. No matter if it's a critic or not, it still really comes down to that. That's just one person's opinion, and one person can never speak for the masses.
Oh, yeah.
Now, here's another thing that I knew when I watched the movie for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
But when we were preparing for the time machine, I just wanted to go do the research and make sure that this what was correct, and I found out that I was correct. The guy that played the old neighbor that had that poodle dog.
Yeah.
He's an actor named Gale Gordon.
Okay.
And back in the 1950s and the 1960s, Gale Gordon was all over the place. He was extremely well known as an actor and had a very, very successful career. But where I got to know Gale Gordon as a child, I used to watch Dennis the Menace.
Oh, okay.
As a child.
Wow.
And Gale Gordon used to play Mr. Wilson during the time that I was watching the show.
Wow.
And I found out in doing the research that Gale Gordon actually replaced somebody else on the show. But my personal memories of growing up watching Dennis the Menace.
That was your Mr. Wilson.
Gale Gordon as Mr. Wilson in that TV show.
Isn't that funny, Gar? That was your Mr. Wilson. And I love the fact that you took the time to find that out and was sure to mention it before you wrapped up today's.
I always knew it. When I watched the movie, I go, "That's Mr. Wilson." But I wasn't sure. But I took the time to make sure. Turns out I was right.
And you know what I love about that? That kind of is the whole point of why we do the time machine. Okay, people who listen to the episodes of A Time Machine, I'm sure we get all different ages, or people close to your age, my age, younger, older. But the point is, many people listening to this might think Dennis the Menace is a movie from the 1990s with Walter Matthau, may have no idea of the TV show. And it's funny, because the actor Gale Gordon, I didn't even know what the guy's name was, but my point is, people think of that actor and they think all he ever did was the Burbs. And to find out, not only was he Mr. Wilson on the classic Dennis the Menace TV show, but he had other films that he was known. So my point is, as time goes on, some of these actors, even though they did work like this guy on Dennis the Menace, they get forgotten because they've been passed on for how many years now, and
well, yeah, it's like 50 years later.
Yeah.
Or, and of course, in that 50 years, the whole thing is going to fade.
Yeah.
But back in the 50s 50s and the 60s, Gil, Gordon was big, and he was all over the place on a lot of shows.
So I hope when
he was very successful during that time period.
So I hope when we post today's episode, Gar, and people hear that not only do they go and watch the Burbs, but they go watch, try to find some classic episodes of this guy in Mr. Wilson. I'm sure you can find old episodes on YouTube or they played on Nick at Night and stuff like that. And the other thing I really got to say that's important before we wrap up today's episode, the anticipation throughout this movie is key. And what I mean by that, a lot of times when you have these horror movies, like it's the build-up of a scene before the actual event takes place. I love the scene in the movie where there's a couple of times this happens where they're spying on the neighbors. They go to the weird-looking haunted house. They're on the front porch, and they fall through the porch. And then there's a big knocker. They knock it, ooh, and then the stuff throws off. And then he rings the doorbell where all the bees come and sting them. I mean, again, kind of just the build-up there. And then the thing with the bees, I'm like, man, that was such a, I don't know if cool is the right word, but that was such an interesting scene.
Yes. And then also another one of my favorite parts of the movie was when all the neighbors came to, introduce themselves to the Klopeks, and the wives, and they brought fudge and all that stuff. Yeah. When Carrie Fisher does the door knock.
Yeah.
Oh my God! It takes me to the first time I watched the movie because I didn't, and the way they did that door knock, the sound to it and everything.
Yeah.
Perfection. It was perfection.
And then when he's squirting them down after they got stung by the bees, and it was just classic. And I'm like, wow, just that one scene alone where he rings the bell and the bees start swarming on them. I'm like, that was something I didn't even expect.
Another part of my favorite, another favorite part of mine is when the Klopek's son, I guess his name is Hans, drives the car out to where the trash cans are and then pulls some trash out and puts it in the trash can and then takes that hoe and starts beating it into the trash can.
Yeah.
That scene is so dramatic. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so creepy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just love that scene.
Yeah, I loved it all. It was really fun looking back on the Burbs, and it's one of those. It really is a classic cult film, and people haven't seen it, I urge you to check it out. Like Gar said, it's a fun movie, and see, this is another case, Gar, like I said, where it really has nothing to do with Halloween, but it's a great example of how the audience, the people that have seen this film over years, they have turned it into a Halloween type of event, a Halloween theme. And the funny thing, no mention of Halloween all through the film, has nothing to do with Halloween, but it's the whole spook factor that people have kind of made this a Halloween film.
It's a perfect fit.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
Even though maybe it never was meant to be, it is a perfect fit.
It's another case of, like we've talked so many times on the Time Machine, where maybe the audience gets it a little more than the so-called Hollywood expert. Maybe it's another case of where the audience really does know best.
And the success of Burbs is the audience.
Yeah.
Because it's the fact that it got released on video, where the movie discovered a whole new audience, and it became this cult classic that it became. Because had it not been for, at that time, videotapes being so popular at that time, you know what I mean? That and Burbs is just an indication of just one of the movies that discovered that whole afterlife after its theatrical release.
Yeah.
Because like I said at the beginning of the Time Machine, up until then, if a movie was not successful in the theaters, it was a wash.
Yeah.
That was it.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, videotapes became popular, and a whole new life to movies was discovered by the studios, and movies that in the past would have been a loss. You know, they would have lost money in making the movie and releasing it. Now the movie becomes profitable, and some of those movies became very profitable in that second life. And I think Burbs is one of those movies that became very profitable in that second life. So it's all like things just kind of falling into place that allowed this movie to become the successful. Had it not been for videotapes being popular at the time, Burbs would have been lost in the shuffle.
And chances are we wouldn't even be talking about it, you know?
Yes. And so it's all happenstance, and everything fell into place for this movie to become what it's become now for us to talk about.
And I just love happenstance when things are not forced and they just happen because it was meant to be. And Gar, this was another fun episode to do, just to let people know. We're actually... because I'm going to get ready to go on vacation in just a little over a week. We're going to actually do our very next episode 1 week from today, and we're going to continue our holiday theme set of shows. Next week, we're going to be talking about The Wizard of Oz, and we're going to get into it next week, Gar, but I think The Wizard of Oz is going to be probably the first time we've talked about a film that is really kind of... really more than anything like a great world of make-believe, and that's what makes the film so much fun. We're going to get into it next week, but what I mean is it's something that's not really even possible, but that's what makes the film so great. It's one of these things where you can kind of go off to Never Never Land and forget about your problems, and you kind of wish, oh wow, wouldn't it be great if the world was really like that?
Well, the movie, okay, we're going to do a whole episode about it, so, but that movie was a big, huge part of my childhood.
Not just yours, buddy, but so many people,
Yes, a huge part of my childhood.
And we will talk about it next week, Gar Borras. And next week, I'm going to be posting this episode we just did on the Burbs. So thanks so much, Gar Borras, for being a part of this. We could not do it without you, which is why we didn't do it last week, because you were being a good son and went to visit your mother, and we love you for that.
Well, thank you. I can't thank you enough. This is just such an enjoyable thing to do.
Okay, you have a great rest of your weekend, Gar, and we'll be talking to you.